So I think this is a great opportunity to demonstrate the difference between shooting ProRes video, ProRes film and RAW in, I think, quite a challenging scene. We've got under the pier here where our eyes can see quite clearly the detail in the wood, the green, the rotting wood and the rust on the metalwork. In the distance we've got snow on the ground, we've got some highlights on the beach huts, and in the distance, I did some spot meter checks a second ago, we're getting F32 to F45 on the highlight on the sky, F22, and then right in the foreground here we're not getting any exposure reading at all. So that's a 12 to 14 stop range of exposure. Now what's going to be interesting is understanding how each of the different codecs will handle that in terms of ProRes video, ProRes film and RAW. So I'm on ProRes video here and I'm exposed so I can maintain information in the wood of the underside of the pier. But what's happening is I'm blowing my highlights and we would never get away with that. So what I'd have to do is expose by bringing my variable neutral density down so that my highlights don't clip beyond 100 IRE. So I'm exposing for my highlights here. But look at what's happened to the underside of the pier. I've lost all information. Now, I don't hate this shot. Creatively, I actually like the way it's darkened down. But let's just say the director really wanted to see the underside of this pier and also what was happening in the distance. Well, it's not going to happen in ProRes video because the Rec 709 color space is almost like an 8-bit color space. It's compressing, it's adding contrast, it's adding punch. It looks great to the eye. It's designed to be broadcast on TV. So if we want to see more information, then the first thing we should do is move to ProRes film. So go to my record function, set to ProRes film. There we go. Instantly, the image looks flatter. But we're still not really seeing huge amounts more information in the dark areas of the scene. But like we mentioned before, watch what's happened to the waveform. When we were peaked at 100 in ProRes video, we've now extended the range, and what our waveform is saying is we're underexposed. So let's open up the variable neutral density, put our highlights up at 100 IRE. We're now putting the exposure of the highlights back where it was in ProRes video. Look at what that effect does. It raises the dynamic range, it raises the information being recorded in the shadow areas of the scene. So we're seeing more. We can now see detail in the wood. And that's what happens when you shoot a log or a film image. But let's say we wanted to get the absolute maximum out of the sensor, the full 13 stops, raw image. We'd go into RAW. We're now shooting RAW 2.5K. I'm largely ignoring what the waveform is doing because the waveform works in an 8-bit color space. So what I'm doing is I'm reading the sensor and I'm using the zebras as my reference to sensor clip. So by having the zebras up, that's definitely overexposed. If I pull my zebras back so I don't see them anywhere in the frame, even though my waveform is reading over 100% IRE, I'm recording enough information so that when this gets into the grading suite, you will be amazed at how much information is actually present in the sky. So I'm going to hand this over to James now, who's going to take this footage and demonstrate the difference in the grading suite between ProRes video, ProRes film and RAW.
So now we're back in the studio, let's have a look at the 3 video file formats that Den's been filming out in Southwold. The ProRes video, the ProRes film, and of course the RAW DNG format. So inside of Resolve here, we have 4 shots on the timeline, and they're in 3 different formats. The first 2 shots are ProRes video. The third shot is ProRes film, and the 4th shot is a RAW DNG file. And you'll actually see that the RAW DNG file and the ProRes film shot on surface look very similar, but what we'll probably see is that there will be a lot more information that we can pull back from the DNG file. But let's start by looking at the ProRes video files. For the first clip here, we can see that Den has exposed predominantly for the background of the scene, so that we keep the sky and the background elements of the rocks here all nicely exposed. But what's happened is that the underside of the bridge has darkened out. Now stylistically, this could work well, but what if the director wanted to see the state of the bridge? So in this case, in the second clip, which is also ProRes video, Den is exposed so that we can see better detail in the shadow area of the underside of the bridge. But as a result, the background of the clip here has blown out. Now, should we try and bring the highlights of the clip down here to try and bring back some information? All that really happens is at a certain point we can bring some highlights back, but the white just tends to go grey. If we look here on our histogram and a waveform, we brought the highlights right down, and really all that's happening is that the highlight tone is going grey and we're not actually getting any more information back. Even if we affect the midtones here, we're still not really seeing the same amount of information in the sky that we were seeing in the first clip when the sky had been exposed. So inversely, if we try and pull up the shadow area on the first clip to try and match that of the second clip, really all we're seeing is that the shadows go fairly milky. We're not really getting the same sort of tonality in the wood and the same sort of look that we were getting when we actually expose for the shadow areas. Even if we bring up the mids more and try and balance it out, it's not doing a bad job, but we're not getting exactly the same sort of look. So now let's look at our third clip, which is all shot as ProRes film. Now shooting as ProRes film is going to give you more stops of dynamic range. If I work with the ProRes film clip to try and balance out the scene and get as much information as I can from the sky, if I A/B between the two, I'm still not getting exactly the same tonality. The sky is still basically a big white mass, whereas here we can see that there are actually clouds in the sky and there's more information to be seen. We can certainly get quite close using ProRes film, which goes to show just how powerful it is even when you're recording to a compressed codec such as Apple ProRes or DNx HD, but providing you use a log curve in the case of ProRes film to try and maintain as much information as possible. So now looking at our final clip on the timeline, the raw DNG file. Although on surface it looks just like the ProRes film file because it's flattened log-like look, we should hopefully be able to extract even more information from this file. And we're going to start by going to the camera raw settings and bringing the exposure all the way down across the whole image, just to see what detail is actually still there. Once we've achieved an exposure that we're happy with in the back of the shot, we now need to deal with bringing up the foreground detail. And to do this, we're going to use a parallel node, which demonstrates the power in the way that Resolve works, using nodes over layers. The advantage a parallel node has is that it allows us to use the source footage at the start, as opposed to using a serial node, which will continue to take the data from the node before. And what's important when using a parallel node here is that we want to be pulling up the blacks and the midtones within the image. By balancing backwards and forwards between the midtones, the highlights, and the shadow tones of the scene, we can slowly start to pull up the foreground of the shot whilst maintaining the background exposure. So if we look at the final effects of adding a secondary parallel window, we can see how we've separated out the foreground and the background elements, with the background still maintaining as much dynamic range and exposure as was shot, and now with the foreground lifting up to shadow areas under the bridge and being able to see that detail. If we compare this raw DNG shot to that of the ProRes video from the first shot and that of the ProRes video from the second shot, we can see that we get a much more even tone of exposure all the way from the most underexposed parts of the image all the way to the highlights at the back of the shot. This example is to really demonstrate just how powerful it is when you work with the DNG raw files. If we show the before with no correction on the scene to the after with the scene color corrected, we can see just how much information there is in the raw DNG file.